What if the most powerful stories are the ones that don't show you everything, but instead leave space for your imagination to wrestle with what's missing? That question sits quietly at the heart of Jeremiah Johnson, lingering long after the final scene fades. On the surface, it appears to be a simple Western, a man turning his back on society to live alone in the mountains. But the longer you sit with it, the more it unfolds into something deeper, more unsettling, and far more human. Because this is not just a story about survival. It's a story about what survives inside a man when everything else has been taken away. And perhaps the better question is this: when a man walks into the wilderness, is he really searching for freedom, or is he running from something he cannot face? The silence before the storm. The world Jeremiah leaves behind is never fully explained, and that absence matters. We see him in uniform at the beginning, a soldier who has chosen to walk away. But why? Was it disillusionment, anger, guilt, or something even harder to define? The film never answers that directly. And maybe that's the point. Because sometimes the most important details are the ones left unsaid. He doesn't give a speech. He doesn't explain himself. He simply leaves. And as he steps into the mountains, there's a quiet understanding. Whatever he's escaping, he believes the wilderness will be simpler. But is it ever? The Rocky Mountains rise before him, vast, indifferent, and utterly unforgiving. Snow blankets the ground like a warning. The wind cuts through everything. There are no roads, no signs, no voices. Only silence. And in that silence, a question begins to form. Can a man truly outrun himself? Learning to exist. At first, Jeremiah doesn't look like a man who belongs there. He struggles with the basics, starting a fire, finding food, staying warm. Every mistake carries consequences. Every failure edges him closer to death. The wilderness doesn't care who he was before. It doesn't care about his past, his regrets, or his intentions. It only asks one thing: can you survive? And survival, as he quickly learns, is not a skill, it's a transformation. He meets others along the way, each one a reflection of what life in the mountains can become. There's the old trapper who laughs at his inexperience but offers guidance. A man hardened by years in the wild, yet still carrying a strange warmth beneath his rough exterior. There's the wandering preacher, whose faith feels fragile against the brutality of the land. A reminder that belief, like survival, is tested in isolation. And then there's the mountain man who takes him under his wing, teaching him not just how to live, but how to think differently. How to read the snow. How to track animals. How to listen to the wind. But more importantly, how to accept that the wilderness doesn't bend to you. You bend to it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Jeremiah begins to change. His movements become more deliberate. His eyes sharper. His presence quieter. He speaks less. And in that silence, something begins to settle. But is it peace, or just the absence of noise? A fragile kind of happiness. Time passes, though it's hard to measure in a place untouched by clocks. Jeremiah builds a life, not a grand one, but a meaningful one. A shelter becomes a home. Survival becomes routine. The mountains, once hostile, begin to feel familiar. And then, unexpectedly, he finds connection. A woman enters his life, not through romance as we might expect, but through circumstance. Their relationship grows quietly, without dramatic declarations or grand gestures. They learn each other slowly. She teaches him her language. He teaches her his ways. There's something deeply human in those moments. Two people from different worlds finding common ground in the middle of nowhere. And for the first time, Jeremiah isn't just surviving. He's living. They build something together. Something fragile, but real. A sense of belonging begins to take root. And that raises another question. Can a man who came to the wilderness to be alone ever truly allow himself to love? Because love, unlike solitude, creates something to lose. The weight of loss. The answer comes, as it often does in stories like this, not gently, but all at once. Jeremiah leaves for a time, believing the life he has built will remain untouched. But the mountains do not protect what you love. When he returns, the silence feels different. He senses it before he sees it. And when he does, everything changes. His wife is gone. His child is gone. And in that moment, the man who had begun to find peace is confronted with something far darker. Not just grief, but emptiness. What does a man do when the one thing that anchored him to the world is suddenly gone? Does he collapse under the weight of it? Or does he become something else entirely? The birth of a legend. This is where the story shifts, not into spectacle, but into something quieter and more haunting. Jeremiah doesn't scream. He doesn't deliver a monologue. He simply changes. There's a stillness in him now, but it's not the same as before. It's heavier, colder. His actions become precise, almost mechanical. The wilderness that once taught him how to survive now becomes the stage for something else. Something driven not by necessity, but by pain. Stories begin to spread, whispers carried by those who pass through the mountains. They speak of a man who moves like a shadow. A man who cannot be tracked. A man who has nothing left to lose. And here's where the line between reality and legend begins to blur. Because the more people talk, the less certain the truth becomes. Did he really do all the things they say? Did he truly become the figure they describe? Or is the legend simply a reflection of how others try to make sense of a man they cannot understand? And perhaps the most important question, does it even matter? Because once a story takes on a life of its own, it no longer belongs to the man it was based on. It becomes something else. Isolation redefined. As time passes, Jeremiah becomes increasingly isolated, not just physically, but emotionally. The mountains are no longer a refuge. They are a mirror. Every step he takes, every decision he makes, is shaped by what he has lost. He continues to survive, but the purpose behind it feels different. Before, survival was about building something. Now, it feels like endurance. And there's a difference. Endurance doesn't ask where you're going. It only asks how long you can keep going. But even in that isolation, there are moments, small, almost invisible, where something else flickers beneath the surface. A hesitation. A glance. A memory. Because no matter how far he retreats, he cannot fully erase what he once had. And that raises another question. Can a man truly become something new, or does his past always follow him, like a shadow he cannot outrun? Encounters that matter. Throughout his journey, Jeremiah continues to cross paths with others. Some are brief. Some linger longer. Each encounter reveals a different facet of who he has become. There's the trapper who recognizes him, not as a man, but as a story. There's the traveler who fears him without fully understanding why. And then there are those who see something deeper, something human still buried beneath the legend. These interactions matter, not because they change the plot, but because they challenge the perception of who Jeremiah is. Is he the man the stories describe? Or is he still the person who once built a home, who once loved, who once hoped for something more? And perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: he is both. The cost of survival. By the time we reach the final moments of the story, Jeremiah has become something difficult to define. He is not a hero. He is not a villain. He is something in between, a man shaped by his choices, his losses, and the world he chose to inhabit. The wilderness did not create him. It revealed him. And that's what makes his story so compelling. Because it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. What would we become in his place? Would we seek peace, or revenge? Would we hold on to our humanity, or let it slip away in the face of overwhelming loss? And perhaps most importantly, is survival enough? The quiet ending. The story does not end with a grand confrontation. There is no dramatic resolution, no clear victory or defeat. Instead, it closes with something much quieter. A moment. A glance. An understanding. Jeremiah encounters a figure from the very world he has been in conflict with, a man who represents everything that has shaped his journey. They do not speak. They do not fight. They simply acknowledge each other. And in that silence, something profound happens. Because for the first time, it feels like the cycle might stop. Not because it has been resolved, but because it has been recognized. And that leaves us with one final question. After everything he has endured, everything he has become, is Jeremiah Johnson finally at peace? Or has he simply learned how to live with the weight of who he is? Why this story stays with us. There's a reason this story lingers long after it's over. It doesn't give us easy answers. It doesn't tell us what to feel. Instead, it invites us to sit with uncertainty, to reflect, to question. Because in the end, Jeremiah Johnson is not just about one man in the wilderness. It's about the parts of ourselves we try to leave behind, the things we run from, the things we lose, and the things we become in the process. So maybe the real story isn't about survival at all. Maybe it's about identity, about transformation, about the quiet, often painful journey of understanding who we are when everything else has been stripped away. And that brings us back to where we started. What if the most powerful stories are the ones that don't show you everything? What if the deepest emotions are not delivered through speeches, but through silence, distance, and the things a character cannot say out loud? Because sometimes, what's left unsaid is exactly what stays with us the longest. No words. Just a gesture of peace. It's subtle. Almost understated. A small movement, almost easy to miss, yet it carries the weight of an entire life. And that choice raises an important question. Do stories become more powerful when they resist the urge to explain everything? Do they linger longer when they ask us to feel instead of simply understand? Behind the scenes, the making of Jeremiah Johnson was as harsh as the story itself. This wasn't a comfortable studio production where everything was controlled, polished, and safe. The film was shot in remote areas of Utah, in places so isolated they seemed to belong to another time altogether. The mountains were unforgiving. The air was thin. The terrain was rough and endless, with the crew often hauling heavy equipment across steep ground, far from roads, far from help, and far from anything that could make the work easier. There were no luxuries, no shortcuts, no soft places to land. At night, the temperature dropped below freezing, even in summer. Cast and crew slept in tents, wrapped in layers, waking to frost on their gear and cold settling into their bones before the sun ever rose. Every morning felt like another test. Every scene demanded more than performance, it demanded endurance. How do you act naturally when your hands are numb? How do you stay present when the wind cuts through your clothes and the landscape itself seems determined to break you down? And Robert Redford? He pushed himself to the limit. That commitment is visible in nearly every frame. In one scene, the frozen beard you see was not a makeup effect at all. It was real ice, formed during an actual blizzard. In another, he worked repeatedly through waist-deep snow, taking the same punishing route over and over until the shot felt right. The physical toll was not hidden from the camera. It became part of the film's truth. And at one point, he even broke 2 ribs during filming and kept it secret for weeks, afraid that stopping would delay production and disrupt the fragile rhythm of the project. How many actors would do that? How many productions would demand that kind of sacrifice? Now ask yourself this: does knowing that change how you see the film? Because suddenly, it is not just a story about survival. It is survival. The suffering is not decorative. It is built into the making of the movie itself, as if the environment, the actor, and the character were all locked in the same struggle. Some of the film's most emotional moments were also the most genuine. The scene where Jeremiah discovers his murdered family was filmed in a single take, with minimal direction. Redford reportedly did not know exactly what he would see when the moment came, and that uncertainty shaped everything that followed. His reaction was completely real. There is no polished distance in that scene, no visible performance layered over emotion. There is only shock, grief, and a human being trying to absorb an unbearable reality. And afterward, he reportedly walked into the woods and sat alone for hours. Can you feel why that moment lands so hard? It is because the scene does not ask to be admired. It asks to be endured. That raw authenticity is part of what makes the film unforgettable. It does not just tell you Jeremiah is a man changed by loss. It lets you watch the change happen in real time. Each silence, each glance, each slow movement across the landscape adds to the sense that something inside him has been permanently altered. Interestingly, not everything made it into the final cut. One fully filmed sequence involving the U.S. cavalry was removed because it shifted the story toward a broader political narrative. Director Sidney Pollack chose to keep the focus personal, on grief, isolation, and inner conflict. That decision mattered. It meant the film remained centered on one man's inward journey rather than becoming a wider commentary that might have pulled attention away from its emotional core. The studio disagreed. Studios often do. They want clarity, structure, and broad appeal. They want everything spelled out, every thread tied off, every meaning made obvious. But Pollock held his ground. And looking back, it is worth asking, would adding that scene have strengthened the film or diluted its emotional core? Would more context have made it richer, or would it have softened the loneliness that defines it? Sometimes the most powerful choice a filmmaker can make is to leave space for the audience to do some of the work. Even the ending sparked debate. The studio wanted something more traditional, something definite, something that could feel safely complete. But Pollock insisted on the quiet, ambiguous finale. And that choice says everything about the kind of film this is. It does not rush to reassure us. It does not hand us a neat conclusion. Instead, it leaves us sitting with uncertainty, with reflection, with a feeling that the journey mattered more than the destination. And here's what Pollock noticed. People who loved that ending kept thinking about it. Those who didn't, quickly forgot it. That is a fascinating insight, isn't it? Maybe endings that answer everything are easier to consume, but endings that leave us unsettled are the ones that stay alive in us. When Jeremiah Johnson was first released, it was respected, but not immediately seen as a classic. It did not arrive with the loud, instant recognition some films receive. Instead, it grew slowly, quietly, almost like a story being passed from one person to another around a campfire. Through television reruns, word of mouth, and a growing appreciation for subtle storytelling, the film found its audience. It resonated especially with viewers who valued introspection over spectacle, people who recognized that silence can carry meaning just as powerfully as dialogue. And it even made history as the first Western shown at the Cannes Film Festival, a reminder that a film rooted in solitude and raw terrain could still reach international prestige. Years later, the legend behind it continued to grow, blurring the line between history and myth even further. That too is part of its enduring power. The film does not just tell a story, it becomes one. So now, let's come back to where we started. What makes Jeremiah Johnson endure? Is it the performance, the realism, the haunting sense of isolation? Or is it something deeper, something harder to name, the fact that it refuses to show everything? The film trusts the audience. It trusts that we can understand loss without explanation, dignity without speeches, and transformation without being told exactly what to think. Because sometimes, what's left unsaid carries more weight than what's shown. Sometimes a quiet look means more than a long speech. Sometimes the absence of detail makes the feeling stronger, not weaker. And maybe that is the real reason this film still lingers in people's minds. So let me leave you with this. Do you think the film became more powerful by holding back the darker parts of the true story? Or would it have been stronger if it had fully embraced the brutal legend it came from? And perhaps the bigger question, in a world that often demands louder, faster, and more explicit storytelling, do we still have room for something this quiet, this patient, and this honest?